Afterwards, Moses and Aaron went in and told Pharaoh, "Thus says the Lord God of Israel, let my people go, that they may hold a feast to me in the wilderness." And Pharaoh said, "Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice to let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, nor will I let Israel go." So they said, "The God of the Hebrews has met with us. Please let us go 3 days' journey into the desert and sacrifice to the Lord our God, lest he fall upon us with pestilence or with the sword." And the king of Egypt said to them, "Moses and Aaron, why do you take the people from their work? Get back to your labor." And Pharaoh said, "Look, the people of the land are many now, and you make them rest from their labor." So the same day, Pharaoh commanded the taskmasters of the people and their officers, saying, "You shall no longer give the people straw to make brick as before. Let them go and gather straw for themselves. And you shall lay on them the quota of bricks which they made before. You shall not reduce it, for they are idle. Therefore they cry out, saying, 'Let us go and sacrifice to our God.' Let more work be laid on the men, that they may labor in it, and let them not regard false words." And the taskmasters of the people and their officers went out and spoke to the people, saying, "Thus says Pharaoh, I will not give you straw. Go, get yourselves straw where you can find it, yet none of your work will be reduced." So the people were scattered abroad throughout all the land of Egypt to gather stubble instead of straw. And the taskmasters forced them to hurry, saying, "Fulfill your work, your daily quota, as when there was straw." Also the officers of the children of Israel, whom Pharaoh's taskmaster had set over them, were beaten and were asked, "Why have you not fulfilled your task in making brick both yesterday and today as before?" Then the officers of the children of Israel came and cried out to Pharaoh, saying, "Why are you dealing thus with your servants? There is no straw given to your servants. And they say to us, 'Make brick.' And indeed your servants are beaten, but the fault is in your own people." But he said to them, "You are idle, idle. Therefore you say, 'Let us go and sacrifice to the Lord.' Therefore go now and work, for no straw will be given to you, yet you shall deliver the quota of bricks." And the officers of the children of Israel saw that they were in trouble after it was said, "You shall not reduce any bricks from your daily quota." Then, as they came out from Pharaoh, they met Moses and Aaron, who stood there to meet them. And they said to them, "Let the Lord look on you and judge, because you have made us abhorrent in the sight of Pharaoh and the sight of his servants, to put a sword in their hand to kill us." So Moses returned to the Lord and said, "Lord, why have you brought trouble on this people? Why is it you have sent me? For since I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has done evil to his people. Neither have you delivered your people at all." And the Lord said to Pharaoh, "Now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh. For with a strong hand he will let them go, and with a strong hand he will drive them out of his land." And God spoke to Moses and said to him, "I am the Lord. I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as God Almighty. But by my name, Lord, I was not known to them. I have also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, the land of their pilgrimage in which they were strangers. And I have also heard the groaning of the children of Israel when the Egyptians kept in bondage, and I have remembered my covenant. Therefore say to the children of Israel, I am the Lord. I will bring you out from under the burden of the Egyptians. I will rescue you from their bondage, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great judgment. I will take you as my people, and I will be your God. Then you shall know that I am the Lord your God, who brings you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. And I will bring you into the land which I swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I will give it to you as a heritage. I am the Lord. So Moses spoke to the children of Israel, but they did not heed Moses because of anguish of spirit and cruel bondage. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Go in, tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to let the children of Israel go out of his land. And Moses spoke before the Lord, saying, The children of Israel have not heeded me. How then shall Pharaoh heed me? For I am of uncircumcised lips. And the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron and gave them a command for the children of Israel and for Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to bring the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt.
Lord, I pray that what I may say today may be inspired by your Spirit and may be informed by your word. Amen. Sometimes things get worse before they get better. The story so far: Moses has appeared at the border of Egypt. Having fled many years before, having killed an Egyptian, he's returned. And there is hope as he meets some of the elders. This man's going to do something for us. Maybe we'll be released from slavery. And what is Moses' plan? He goes to see Pharaoh and he says to Pharaoh, well, quite a moderate plan compared to what would eventually happen. He doesn't actually say to Pharaoh, release my people from slavery and let them go. He just says, this is what the God of Israel says. Let my children who you have held as slaves go for a short period of just 3 days. Let them give sacrifices to me in the wilderness, and then you can come back and impound them as slaves. Just giving them a 3-day break in the middle of a lifetime of bondage. But Pharaoh, who is quite obviously used to getting his own way, his response is, who is this God of Israel? Not my God, not a big God. They are my slaves. Why should I pay heed to him? You're making it up. You just want to be lazy, don't you? Or they want to be lazy. And he turns round to his foreman, and he turns round to the work supervisors, and he says, well, I want them to make the same amount of bricks, but rather than provide straw, they've got to go and make their own stubble, which would add a couple of hours to a very, very long working schedule. Just imagine how it would disrupt the kids, how it would disrupt your life if your work day increased from, say, 12 to 14 hours, and 12 hours was quite normal for a slave. How would you cook a meal and sleep? How would you pick up the kids? How would you do this? How would you do that? Just puts pressure on everything if you had 2 hours work to the day. It's about the amount of time it would take to gather the stubble. And the people are obviously not very happy. Things have got worse before they get better. And they start to complain. And as they complain through their representatives just get beaten. And they go and see the Pharaoh, and the Pharaoh sends them back, and again they're beaten. And when they see Moses and Aaron, who of course are not manufacturing bricks, I mean, Moses is not in slavery, he's just an exile who's reappeared at the border. Well, you can imagine their displeasure. Well, I mean, you've made life harder for us, but you're not in slavery. You're not making the same number of bricks without the straw, are you? Doesn't actually lead at this point in time to assisting Moses' popularity or his credibility. He would have thought that he'd end up at this point in time being a hero of Israel and basically editing and composing the 5 books of the Pentateuch. Things sometimes get worse before they get better. And at this point in time, well, the children of Israel don't know what we know. We have certain advantages reading the book rather than living through it. We can look into the future and back. We know what the next scene will be. After Moses meets with the Lord after being moaned at by the people, and he says, I just made it worse for these people. What do I do next? I don't feel like a public speaker. And the Lord commands Moses to go back. And of course, we know the rest of the story. We know that he turns his staff into a serpent, that he eats the Pharaoh's serpents, that 10 plagues fall upon Egypt, that in the end, the Egyptians can't wait for the Jews to leave and the pestilence to stop. Instead of going into the wilderness empty-handed for 3 days, the Egyptians actually, in the end, assist them to leave. Take this gold, take this silver, take whatever you like. Just get out of here. We just don't want any more plagues, having lost the firstborn. Just get out of here. We don't want to ever see you again. You're free. Go where you like. Cause them problems instead. But even then, Pharaoh backslides. He relents on his promise. He catches up at the Red Sea, but then rather than being slaughtered in the middle of nowhere or impounded back into slavery, we know the story from the future looking back of how the sea parted, how the Lord took them through it, and how Pharaoh and his army was drowned, and how, yes, they were released from slavery. Yes, they got out with the rewards of gold and silver and all good things, I suppose, as recompense for so many years of forced labor, and they entered the promised land. We know the whole story. We can look back and we know it looked well for them. But as for the children of Israel, they're having to live in it, and they can't see the future. Their choice is whether they actually decide to trust in God or not. Sometimes worse comes before better, even for those who are chosen by the God of Israel. Sometimes things get worse before they get better. What should our response be? During this COVID crisis and over the last few months, I can sympathize with how the people felt. In all honesty, my world feels at times like a wall with some bricks missing. The bricks have been knocked out. Life is poorer, weaker, less strong than it used to be in the not too distant past. Things are missing. My prayer partner's moved up to Sheffield. He can't afford to buy in London. Sheffield is 2 hours away. Our pastor's moved to Coventry. He can't afford to rent in London. Coventry is an hour and a half away. Close friends of mine have moved from New Zealand to Australia. New Zealand and Australia are really the opposite side of the world from London. It's as far away as China is from America, as far away as it can. Small things are missing. Our local garden centre's shut. Our friend who used to work there's lost her job, made insolvent in the lockdown. My favourite convenience store has shut. That didn't survive. I go to a place called Peckham. I've got 3 friends that live there. I've got 6 professors who I used to visit when I was the travelling secretary of Christian Academic Network. The favourite cafe of all 9 of us, because it was so cheap and yet so high in quality, was Jenny's. I last went to Peckham 2 or 3 weeks ago. Jenny's is shut. The building is for sale. We saw the owner take out a Coke machine as a friend of mine and myself tried to get in there for a coffee, and we heard the bad news and we were distraught. Things ain't what they used to be. Things are strange at the moment. Things can get worse before they're better. Things can get poorer before they get richer. Things can get harder before they improve. What's our response? I think we've got 2 responses possible. And it's a choice we have to make on an everyday basis. I don't think there is a default position that we can push the button on and have it stick. I think we have to decide every day in the COVID crisis, with things getting worse before they get better, we have to decide which of 2 responses to have. The first response is just to get annoyed and angry, and to get really annoyed. Jeff shared a little about my family history. My mother's side were Italian Jews who escaped Trieste and Mussolini and managed to get out to London. My father's family were unusual. We were Jews who got to Britain as political refugees escaping a Holocaust intended for somebody else. We were Armenian Jews who got out of Armenia in case the Turks shot us because they mistook us for proper Armenians. They were getting out of the Armenian genocide. My parents, particularly my dad, were aware of the Armenian genocide as well as the Nazi Holocaust. We also lived in a particularly Irish part of London. In the 1840s in Ireland, we had what was called the potato famine. 1 Irishman in 3 was starved to death, and 1 Irishman in 3 was forced to leave the country. The population of Ireland was reduced from 6 million to 2 million as a result of British colonial policy. No wonder you declared independence in America. Our Irish friends were as aware of the potato famine as we were the Armenian genocide and the Nazi Holocaust. We had 3 atrocities for the price of 1. And my parents' reaction was, well, God is probably fictitious. But if he is real, he's obviously so incompetent in protecting his chosen people. He doesn't deserve our acknowledgement, let alone our worship. And that's why my parents became protest atheists and drifted into Marxism. They got angry. They got annoyed by the fact that bad things were happening to comparatively good and innocent people. What kind of God allows this to happen to ordinary people or his chosen people or anyone? Well, it's not God who orchestrates sin. He gives us free will, but it's actually human beings who do it because of their fallen nature and under the auspices of the evil one, of course. But then we know that moving backwards, but we may not consider it going forwards. And a lot of people are going to be responding to the COVID crisis by getting very angry or annoyed with God in allowing it. However, that is one of 2 possible responses. What is the alternative? The alternative is to look at your blessings in the past and to count your blessings. I felt tempted to get angry and annoyed with God recently as things haven't gone my way, as the COVID crisis just makes life harder more time consuming, more difficult, more awkward, as I miss things that have been taken away. But I think, Mark, you're 61. When I was 18, two things happened. I became an adult and went to college, and I also became a believer in Jesus. Since then, I've had 43 happy years. I've got blessings to count. God has done so many good things for me over those 43 years. They are far happier and far more fulfilling than they would have been if I continued in the lifestyle that my parents had brought me in. If I followed their promiscuity, if I followed their narcotics, if I followed their politics, frankly, I would probably be dead by now. I've got a heck of a lot of blessings to count. Look at your life, particularly since you've become a believer. Are there not blessings that you can count? And any life is better lived with God's approval in a relationship with Him, and also with Him at your side, under His provision and protection, with Him as your Father, your guide, and your guard. Life is better when you include God rather than exclude Him, even when it's tough, even when it's worse before it gets better. If your life is tough, it's likely to get easier if you trust in the Lord. If your life has got worse, the best way of getting it better again is by continuing with the Lord until the Lord in His grace turns the tide in your life. I think it's legitimate to mourn when you're missing things, but I don't think that being annoyed or being angry or rejecting God or closing Him to the side of your life helps at all. During the COVID crisis, life is going to be tough. People are going to fall into despair. People are going to get angry. Nevertheless, I think there will be a minority of people who, in this despair and in this desperation, will actually turn to God and be saved. I think there's actually a fruit to be reaped in the harvest out there. But what should our response be? Put yourself in the position of the children of Israel making the bricks without the straw. How would you respond? Understandable to get angry or to get annoyed, but not justified. And knowing what we know, I would hope that if we are in a similar position, we would do better. Even if you think your life is making bricks without straw. And the closest I can think to this is getting your food from a supermarket and having to clean everything with a deodorant swab, which takes twice as long. Even if life is tougher and more complicated and more difficult, and you're bereaved about a few things, life is still better. There's less despair. There's less desperation when instead of getting angry or annoyed, you decide to count your blessings and go forward with God. We know from this story, which is why it's in the Tanakh, why it's in the Torah, that yes, within a very short period of time, Moses had appeared to Pharaoh. The pestilences fell on the Pharaoh and the Egyptians rather than the children of Israel, rather than just having 3 days out in the wilderness so that they pleased God and didn't get a plague. They avoided the 10, and then they went out and they were freed from slavery and went with everything into the promised land. We know the future story, but they didn't know it then. We don't know our future story. We will have to look back at it from glory or a place in the future. But look at the past, look at the present, look at the future, and what is the best default position to take. Please, in your despair, if you feel desperate, don't get annoyed or angry with God. The best report, the best response is to count your blessings trust in the Lord and see him by his grace in his own time and in his own way and according to his own plans, turn the corner. The corner turns away from despair with God, not without him. If you feel like I do, and I'm sure there's millions who feel the same way, in your desperation, turn to God and count your blessings. Don't get angry. Don't get annoyed. It's okay to mourn if you're bereaving, but it's not okay to get stroppy.